this next section, we have a character from Dubliners, Tom Kernan. This is a anomaly in Ulysses. Like Miss Dunn, this is going to be one of the few times that we get to look inside the interior monologue of another character besides Bloom, Stephen, or Molly. And it's very brief as well, like like Mrs. Dunn's, but it again provides us with the opportunity to see that all these experiences that Bloom has, his rich inner world, same as Stephen and Molly, that everyone has this varied landscape of creativity and wandering mind inside their head. So it's one more example here. Tom Kernan is the subject in Grace, that short story in Dubliners, of an intervention by his friends, you may remember. And that intervention has apparently not worked because he is still drinking. He will drink throughout the day in Ulysses. Tom Kernan is employed by this company called Poolbook Robertson as a tea merchant. He will contract deals for purchasing large amounts of tea, and he just completed a deal, so he's had a little spot of gin to celebrate. He had talked with the bartender, this Mr. Crimmins fellow, I guess, about this disaster that happened on June 15th, 1904, the day before Bloomsday. And I don't think we've really mentioned it in this series. Basically, it was a disaster in, I want to say it was near New York. This ship, there was some issue with it being not inspected properly, like money was passed. They refer to graft, as people were allowing it to be a functioning ship even though it wasn't really in the condition that it needed to be. So there was a disaster, and I want to say about 1,000 people died, and I'll link to a Wikipedia article in the information below, but it's just something that it's kind of amazing that most people have not heard of this. It sounds like almost as big as like the Titanic or the Hindenburg disaster, but they haven't. So the ship, the Slocum, will be referred to throughout the day. I guess, it happened on the 15th, and it kind of took the time difference for the news to arrive. So it's really being absorbed on Bloomsday by these Dubliners. The conversation that Tom Kernan had with the bartender leads to one of my favorite quotes in the book about America. "America," I said quietly, just like that. "What is it?" "The sweepings of every country, including our own. Isn't that true?" Kernan is walking about a bit, and even though he said he's only had a thumbful of gin, I think maybe he's had other drinks already, or he's had more than a thumbful of gin, to be honest. He seems a little drunk. And when that cavalcade went by in the streets that were driving across Dublin, he's eager to see it, but he doesn't get to it in time. Intrusions in this section, the dialogue that goes, "Hello, Simon," Father Cowley said, "How are things?" And then, "Hello, Bob, old man," Mr. Dedalus answered, stopping. This is a future section in Wandering Rocks that we'll get to. And then this one, "North Wall and Sir John Rogerson's Quay, with hulls and anchor chains, sailing westward, sailed by a skiff, a crumpled throwaway, rocked on the ferry wash. Elijah is coming." This is once more, again, that piece of litter, that pamphlet that Bloom tossed in the river. And then Dennis Breen with his tomes, weary of having waited an hour in John Henry Menton's office, led his wife over O'Connell Bridge, bound for the office of Messrs. Collis and Ward. You remember this guy. This is the husband of Mrs. Breen, the woman that Bloom dated when he was younger, before he met Molly. And he had gone, remember, to John Henry Menton's office to get some kind of libel case against somebody, he doesn't even know who, for this postcard that said UP up. So it doesn't sound like he had much success with John Henry Menton trying to take on the case, because he's a bit of a crackpot. So he's going to other lawyers to try and get the case handled. The next section, we jump back to Stephen Dedalus and his thoughts. A lot of interior monologue this part, and a very different feel from the section with Almedano Artefoni. He is near a jeweler's shop of this guy named Russell, and I think once again this is a Wandering Rock, a name thrown in meant to trick you, because we already had that character A.E. in the library scene. Remember, his name is Russell as well. So this is not that character. It is just one more similar name, like O'Madden and O'Madden Burke or Dudley. It's meant to throw you off. So this Russell is a minor jewelry person, jeweler, and he has no real great significance in the book as a whole, so you can again just kind of drop it. The first part of this this section is very similar to Proteus. It will bring up a lot of that feel, very poetic and very abstract inside the depths of Stephen's head. This is also the part where he is looking at books on a cart. He sees this book on how to win a woman's love, and he's interested in it, but then just as he's about to get to it, his sister arrives, so he tries to put it away so she doesn't see. He's very embarrassed about that. He runs into his sister at the bookseller, and this is Dilly Dedalus, the one that was outside the auction rooms, you remember, and she was given a small amount of money by Simon to get food, but instead of getting food, what has she purchased? A French primer, however you say that, a book on learning French. Stephen is pretty fluent in French, and but he sees her trying to learn the desperation to escape their situation, and all he can think is misery, misery. And the irony is, of course, that he has a large sum of money in his pocket. He could easily give her some money for food or whatever, or try to interact with her more and help her learn something, but he doesn't. It's maybe you can see this as another mystery. Why doesn't he help her? She will drown me with her eyes and hair. All he's left with is his agenbite of inwit. The intrusions in this section: 2 old women, fresh from their whiff of the briny, trudged through Irish Town along London Bridge Road, one with a sanded, tired umbrella, one with a midwife's bag in which 11 cockles rolled. These are the women of Stephen's parable in Aeolus, you recall, the ones that he saw at the beach. They are Anne Cairns and Florence McCabe. And then in the other intrusion, we jump back to Father Conmee. Father Conmee, having read his Little Hours, walked through the hamlet of Donnycarney, murmuring vespers. Next section, we jump back to Simon Dedalus. He has left the auction house. He's walking along and he runs into this guy, Father Cowley. And Father Cowley is having some money issues. He owes a lot of money to that guy that we talked about back in Hades, Reuben Dodd, the moneylender, this Jewish guy who's very stingy with people, and he loans them money, and then he enjoys the usurious interest rates. So everybody kind of hates that guy, Reuben J. Dodd. But in addition to Reuben J. Dodd, Father Cowley also owes money to his landlord, who happens to be that Anglican cleric we saw a few sections back, the guy in the warehouse with Ned Lambert, who was writing that book of history about Dublin. They were in the former abbey. So that guy is Hugh C. Love. That Hugh C. Love guy is the landlord of Father Cowley. So they're walking along, Simon Dedalus and Cowley, and they run into this other guy, Ben Dollard, who at first, when Simon and he are talking, it seems like they might kind of hate each other, but then you kind of realize they're just bantering. Simon's picking on his cheap clothes, and we learn a lot of things in this episode and the next about Ben Dollard. He's a big, tall guy, and he has a bass voice, and we're going to learn some more stuff about him later on. But for now, you just need to know he's kind of down on his luck too, like most people in Dublin, and his clothes are not looking that great. But he's actually a friend of these guys, Cowley and Dedalus. The three of them talk, and they kind of come to an agreement that the Reuben J. Dodd does not have prior claim to any money that Father Cowley might have. First, his primary debt is to his landlord. So they're going to walk to see this sub-sheriff guy and kind of get him to say that, yes, that is the case, to get Reuben J. Dodd and his people that work for him off of Father Cowley's back about the money that he owes. It's certainly becoming a major theme of Dublin life that money and the lack of it is a major problem for most of these Dubliners. that everybody is thinking about money in one shape or form or another. But it's also interesting to see how when they are down on their luck, they band together against these other forces like landlords and people, money lenders. Intrusions in this section: Cashel, Boyle, O'Connor, Fitzmaurice, Tisdall, Farrell, murmuring, glassy-eyed, strode past the Kildare Street Club. You remember this is that eccentric fellow, a real person in Dublin, who would walk along the street and walk on the outside of the street lamps to whatever reason, superstition or whatever. So we'll see him later in Wandering Rocks. Another intrusion. The Reverend Hugh C. Love walked from the old chapter house of St. Mary's Abbey past James and Charles Kennedy's, rectifiers, attended by Geraldines, tall and personable, towards the Tholsel beyond the ford of hurdles. So this is Hugh C. Love again, the guy that was in the warehouse with Ned Lambert. And it's interesting to see the way that as he walks along the street, Joyce describes his locations in terms of historical incidents. I think this is Joyce showing us that we see the world through our own particular lens. I had no idea what this Tholsel thing was, so I'm going to just read you the annotation from the annotations. The Tholsel, literally a toll collector's booth, was built 1307 to 27 to house the courtroom, rooms for the Trinity Guild of Merchants, the Royal Exchange, and offices of the Dublin Corporation. Next section we have Martin Cunningham and Jack Power. You may recall them. They are two men who were riding in the carriage with Bloom back in Hades. And they are walking with a third character, John Wyse Nolan. This is not a character that we have seen before in the book. They are discussing ways that they can give some money to the Dignam family. Remember, Paddy Dignam's dead. And to give the family some money until the, life insurance policy that Dignam had kicks in. It may take a bit and they need money. They're pretty desperate. They are also trying to get one of Dignam's sons into a school, and to do this they are seeking the help of Father Conmee, John Conmee. By the way, do not confuse Conmee and Cowley. They are different names, but again, similar sounding names. Interesting thing to note in their conversation is that we learn that Bloom has donated some money to the Dignam family, so we see that he is a pretty generous guy. They will encounter two other men, Jimmy Henry and this sub-sheriff that we've talked about, Long John Fanning. Sounds like a pirate name to me. Martin Cunningham and them, they try and get them to donate some money to Dignam's family, but they're trying to brush it off that they don't even know Dignam, so basically they don't want to donate. And then the vice-regal cavalcade will pass and they all turn to watch it for a second. It's a very persistent theme in these sections. Intrusions in this one include bronze by gold, Miss Kennedy's head by Mrs. Douce's head appeared above the cross blind of the Ormond Hotel. This is again the Ormond Hotel that the subject or the location of the next episode, Sirens. Another intrusion. On the steps of the City Hall, Councillor Nannetti, descending, hailed Alderman Cowley and Councillor Abraham Lyon ascending. Do you guys remember? This is Nannetti from Ulysses, and he works at the printing at the newspapers, but then he's going to become, we know this from history, that he's going to become a politician in the future, and Bloom has also mentioned this. But as he's going up the stairs, he runs into these two guys, and one of them has the name Cowley, and again, I think this is a trick of Joyce. This is not Father Cowley. Don't get confused. It's just a throwaway character. Another intrusion. Outside La Maison Claire Blazes Boylan waylaid Jack Mooney's brother-in-law, Humpty, tight, making for the Liberties. Jack Mooney's brother-in-law is Bob Doran, the guy who in Dubliners, in the story The Boarding House, was kind of tricked into marrying the daughter of the boarding house woman. So every year he goes on his annual bender, and he's in the midst of that today. In the next section, we're in a little cafe, and we have Mulligan and Haines there just kind of eating and having some tea and talking, and they're talking a lot of smack on Stephen, by the way. But then they notice in the corner this guy is Parnell's brother. Parnell, you remember, the politician who was disgraced, the hope of Ireland, etc. But they see his brother and they just kind of note him over in the corner. The funny thing about, as Mulligan and Haines are talking about Stephen, they discuss his ideas about whether he has the potential to be a great artist. And Mulligan says, oh, he says he's going to be writing a great book in 10 years. And they're kind of cynical, but they also think if anybody can do it, it's Stephen. So they see that he has this kind of mental instability about him, his obsession with the concept of hell that we see in A Portrait of the Artist, that long lecture about hell and the dangers of going to hell. So it's interesting that though they talk about this great work, like, is he going to write a great work? And ironically enough, they're in it. In terms of Stephen as an artist and what he can convey, his obsession with misery and hell and suffering, how is he going to make art? Is that going to overwhelm him? And I think this is what we're going to see that he gets from Bloom, if he gets anything, because Bloom has faced misery. He's had his son die, his father committed suicide, his wife is having this affair, so he struggles with a lot of different things, the hard facts of life, but at the same time he still maintains a sense of love and hope and possibility that Stephen lacks. If anything, what can Bloom show Stephen is how you can still have this feeling of love for his wife even though she is having this affair, how you deal with the messiness and ugliness of life. Intrusions in this episode: the one-legged sailor growled at the area of 14 Nelson Street. England expects. This is, of course, the singing sailor once again, whom Molly gave a coin. Another intrusion: Elijah skiff, light crumpled throwaway, sailed eastward by flanks of ships and trawlers, amid an archipelago of corks, beyond New Wapping Street, past Benson's Ferry, and by the three-masted schooner Rosevean from Bridgewater with bricks. Once again we have Bloom's litter floating along in the river. Next section we show three more minor characters once again. We have first Almadano Artifoni. After he talked with Stephen, you recall he ran for a tram. Well, it turns out he missed his tram. And then we have Cashel, Boyle, O'Connor, Fitzmaurice, Tisdall, Farrell walking along. He sees the flyer for that Elijah guy, the one that Bloom tossed away, and he speaks in Latin. He says, "Coactus volui," which means, having been forced, I was willing. I admit, not totally clear on this guy. I'm sure there's been a lot of writing about him, but I have not read much. If you have any elucidating thoughts on what is going on with him, and I just don't totally understand his significance. So Cashel Boyle is rolling along the streets, and as he's walking, he bumps into that blind guy that Bloom helped earlier to cross the street. You remember the blind guy. So as they bump into each other, I was thinking, why did they bump into each other? And I mean, he's not blind, Cashel Boyle, whatever. He's not blind. He can see, the blind guy. So why did they run into each other? And my reasoning is that he refused to walk around him on that part of the sidewalk. They were near one of those light poles, and so he wanted to walk around. The blind guy was walking around, and they bumped into each other. Anyways, the blind guy is pissed off. He goes, "God's curse on you," he said sourly. "Whoever you are, you're blinder nor I am, you bitch's bastard." I also like how it totally changes our image of the blind guy, because all we got of him before was Bloom helping him across the street. He seemed very quiet. He didn't even speak to Bloom really. And suddenly that image has totally changed. The way that we're learning about the blind guy, like most people, I think, is we see them from many angles, and they can be perceived as wonderful by one person and horrible by another. We're like Picasso paintings. A name that will show up in this section is Bloom. Do not confuse it with R. Leopold Bloom. This is another Bloom, a dentist named Bloom. Another trick. No real intrusions in this section, but I guess since we're seeing three different characters kind of hit together. It's kind of like three rocks intersecting. Next section is one of my favorites in Wandering Rocks. It features the son of Paddy Dignam, Patrick Aloysius Dignam. I love the way that Joyce depicts the inner life of young people here and also in Dubliners, and A Portrait of the Artist too, of course, the developing of their consciousness. So his son, Dignam's son, is going to be thinking about his father and the final moments of his father, but he's also, a young man, and he sees this match, this boxing match poster, and he's like getting all excited until he realizes that it already passed. It's an old poster. He also sees a poster for this woman, Marie Kendall, who has shown up throughout Wandering Rocks. What her significance might be, I'm not entirely clear, but you can guess, or it may just be some throwaway bit. But she was a comedian and actress who performed apparently on stage for over 50 years. Interesting fact about Marie Kendall, she would often portray male characters, and this reminds me of Eugene Stratton, a white man who would portray black men, or also reminds me of, in Shakespeare's own day, men would portray the women characters, or white men would portray Othello, black character. So this idea of impersonation, or people not being what they seem to be, is very interesting. It seems to be showing up here. Whenever this poster of Marie Kendall shows up, this phrase occurs, charming soubrette, and you can add it to our list of recurring phrases which seem to have some significance. I'm not, I admit, entirely clear about her significance or the meaning here. Maybe it is, like I said, it has to do with the theme of impersonation. Here are some definitions for a soubrette. A saucy, coquettish, intriguing maidservant in comedies or comic opera. An actress or a singer taking such a part. A young woman regarded as flirtatious or frivolous. Meditate on why Joyce chose to include this phrase. Patrick Dignam is clearly a boy still, one who enjoys seeing a boxing match and seeing his name in the newspaper, but he also is confronting the adult world. It's intruding on him, his father's death, having to take care of, shopping and things like that. But clearly, this is an epiphany, and this feels like something that this episode could have been expanded as something in Dubliners, maybe an unreleased version of a story in Dubliners. And the final section is that vice-regal cavalcade that we've seen so much of throughout this whole episode. This is just some high officials in Dublin who are kind of driving through the city, hand-waving and so on. The people in the cavalcade are the Earl of Dudley, Lady Dudley, and Lieutenant Colonel Heseltine. Most of the characters don't seem to care or seem to only show fake respect to these officials, and this episode will include, I think, all of the characters from this section will include all of the characters from the whole episode of Wandering Rocks. And we'll also get a few characters who we have not seen yet in the book, or not really. Gertie McDowell and even our old friend Mackintosh from the funeral, he shows up on the street there. If Father Conmee, who opened up this whole episode, was the symbol of the church, then these guys in the cavalcade are the symbol of the state. And I love this part about the sewer system. From its sluice in Woodkey Wall under Tom Devon's office, Pottle River hung out in fealty a tongue of liquid sewage. The Pottle River is just another river in Dublin. So that wraps up Wandering Rocks, quite a diverse little collection of vignettes. I admit that it is not one of my favorite episodes, although it does have parts that I do delight in, but I think it's very uneven to me, or it's similar to what happens with Joyce when you are not completely familiar with it. And I've read it many times, but I can only picture some of the geography so well, and I think if I knew it better, next time I go to Dublin, I think I will check out some of those areas a little better. I think that will help me enjoy it more thoroughly. It's just, compared to some of these episodes that we have coming up and that we've already seen, I think it just doesn't hold my attention quite as much. But it does have some wonderful moments. I applaud Joyce for the technique and for trying something new. It's very difficult in some sections, but I think you can handle it, and I hope I've helped. We're going on now to the next section, which is Sirens.